Hi, I'm Jim Shaw, publisher of the Lexington Times and chairman of the board of LexMedia. I'm here with another segment of Coffee with the Candidates in this 2025 election cycle. I'm delighted to say that we've got a lot of candidates running for public office. It's always nice to see when people are out there, they want to engage and get involved. We're fortunate to have a lot of good incumbents running, but we're also fortunate to have some folks, who are running for the first time in open seats, and that's the case in this election for planning board in Lexington. We've got two candidates running. I'm fortunate to have Tom Shiple with me today. Tom announced his campaign some time ago and has been known as a housing advocate with some idea about the importance of keeping certain controls on housing, and we're going to discuss that in a minute. Tom has been a town meeting member since 2018. He's a member of the Bicycle Advisory Committee, an associate member of the Board of Appeals. He's the former head of Lexington United Soccer Club, so for all you soccer fans, that's important. And one of his biggest contributions here in Lexington was his effort with a group of others called the Light Up Lincoln campaign, which was the first effort to put lights on Lincoln Field. Lincoln Field is probably one of the most popular sports areas in Lexington, and that's an important contribution to town. I might add, he's a 16-year resident of Lexington, 3 kids here, and his wife, Susan Lau, is also a town meeting member, so it's in the family. We were talking about how interesting your dinner conversations must be, right? Settling all of the issues. Do you guys agree on a lot of things?
Yeah, I say we generally agree. With respect to Article 34, there was something that we didn't agree on, and maybe that'll come up in the conversation, but generally we're like-minded. Sure.
Well, that's always a good thing, right? So, there are a lot of things that are sort of hot button right now, and so let's just jump right into the MBTA issue. You call it Article 34 because it's coming back, but as a concept, it arrived a couple of years ago, as a concept, and then town meeting brought it in. I guess the requirement was 50-acre zoning for affordable housing in order to meet the requirements of the state. Lexington went above and beyond that to over 200 acres. And some people complained that it might have been too much. But the debate at town meeting, because now we're seeing all kinds of applications, and the numbers, everybody got a different number, but it's over 1,000 units, to be fair. And a lot of this is by right. We talked a little bit about the possibility of mitigation, and there's really, the hands are tied on that, and I do want to talk to you about that because that's important. Not that there's anything you can do about it, but as a concept, it's going forward, we have to make sure that we're doing the right thing before we just open the floodgates and allow people to come in and build. But as a concept, what do you think about the MBTA? The MBTA overlay, and the fact that did we overdo it a little bit? And I know, and you're going to have to clarify a little bit for me.
Sure.
I know that you had something to say about it when it originally came in front of town meeting, that you were concerned about the size and scope of what they were proposing. So let me just throw that out to you. So we talk a little bit about the MBTA as a concept, and then about some of what you thought about back in the day, and then we'll bring it to Article 34.
Okay, so the article in 2023 was also Article 34. There's a little bit of confusion there. As a concept, just to kind of clarify one thing, this mandate from the state was not about affordable housing, it was about more housing. There's an affordable component to it. In Lexington, we put in a 15% requirement that 15% of the units have to be affordable according to a state formula. The other 85% are market rate, and as we know, housing is very expensive here in Lexington. So that housing will be going for whatever the market will bear. So it's about more housing and not so much about affordable housing. Of course, it's housing at lower price points than what we see here in Lexington single-family homes. So in that sense, it's more affordable, but it's not
Right.
strictly affordable according to the state definition.
I had heard a couple of tongue-in-cheek comments about how it's not affordable, but it's attainable.
People use different words. There's no consistent vocabulary for it, really.
Right.
But it's important to make sure everybody understands that this is not going to be housing that's...
That's an important distinction.
It is, yeah. So, I mean, as a concept, I'm very much in favor of it. Eastern Massachusetts is in a housing crisis. Well, really, it's all over the state and all over the country. But particularly here, and it's really affecting our economic development. One of the things that I like about this issue is that it's really a bipartisan issue. In this particular case, it was a Democratic legislator that came up with the idea, and it was a Republican governor that wholeheartedly supported it. His economic secretary, Mike Keneally, who lives here in Lexington, again, a Republican, he was very much behind this.
He championed it.
Yeah, because they see this as an economic issue, because if we don't have housing for folks, they're going to leave, and Massachusetts is not going to continue to grow.
As I recall, he spoke at town meeting.
He did. He did. He was very much in favor of it. So we need more housing as a region. I think it's important for Lexington to do its part. I think the kind of housing that we're seeing is satisfying a lot of unmet needs with these smaller units, single folks, young couples, older folks who are downsizing and want to stay here in Lexington, grandparents who want to live near their grandkids, divorced parents who want to stay close to their families and stay connected. There's a lot of different cases, that this type of more smaller housing, frankly, will satisfy. And so I think it fills a very important need, and I'm glad that the state is doing this.
Well, great. Let's bring it to...
So actually, there was the second part of that then was what happened 2 years ago.
Right.
So, and I'll back up even just a little bit more to 2021. As a town meeting member, I was naturally gravitating towards zoning issues. Those were the articles that were coming before us that I kind of latched onto and really wanted to understand, what was going on. But in the early days, I really wasn't doing my homework necessarily to dig in to really understand the details, because it can be quite complex.
Yes.
So myself and 2 other town meeting members decided to get together and form a little informal group called the Cluster Housing Study Group. And our mission was really to dissect these proposals that were coming before us and break them down into bite-sized chunks that we could explain to other town meeting members how this stuff was going to work, to help them decide how they wanted to vote. So when it came to 2023, we recognized that the proposal from the planning board was pretty ambitious, and we weren't sure that the support was really there to pass that. So we filed an amendment, the 3 of us. We filed an amendment to phase in those 227 acres over first half in 2023, and the second half would go live in 2028. Okay. We had language all set, it cleared town council, and we explained this to other town meeting members that we were going to go forward with that. We were then approached by other town meeting members who also had ideas on how they wanted to tweak it, and we decided, what, if everybody comes forward with their own proposal, it's going to be a big mess at town meetings, so let's see if we can come up with a unified proposal. So we joined that effort. There were 13 town meeting members. Tina McBride actually was one of them, and we worked together on this amendment. And what we ended up with was something that was not so different than what our 3-person team had proposed, but it didn't have the second phase. It was just start off with 134 acres, and there was a height limitation that our group introduced next to residential areas to try to soften the height a little bit right next to residential areas, and that was part of the package also. And we were very much behind that proposal.
So just to clarify, they removed, you ended up removing the phase-in aspect.
Yeah. So we withdrew our amendment.
Right.
We formally withdrew it. So my campaign manager, Barbara Katzenberg, was the person who gave the presentation at town meeting in favor of this go slow approach. I was the first person on town meeting floor to speak in favor of it. And it went to a vote, and it lost by 5 votes. And I mentioned my wife and I don't always agree. She voted against it, and I was up there on the floor supporting it.
Wow, okay.
Okay? So a lot of people give us, I think, give our three-person group more credit than we really deserve for promoting Article 34. My response would be, if we were so successful in convincing town meeting members to do what we thought should have been done, they would have passed the amendment.
Right.
But they didn't.
Right.
And then
And
they
the
eventually...
amendment made a lot of sense. It would make, it would have had great impact in play in the discussion today.
Well, but here's the kicker. Not totally.
Okay.
Because we had good intention to start slow. But what nobody really understood is, among those 227 acres, which ones were going to get developed, right? And it turns out that the 134 acres that we chose would have gotten 70% of the development anyway.
Okay.
3 of the 4 big apartment buildings we would have gotten anyway.
Who decides that?
So we would be having this same discussion about going slow, even if our amendment had passed.
Right, it would just be 30% off.
It would be 30% off.
And who makes that decision as to where the developments go?
The developers.
They acquire the land within the overlay.
The land, yeah, so there's an overlay, there's 12 districts. Right. That 227 acres is divided across 12 different districts. And there have to be landowners who are willing to sell or willing to develop their own property.
And for those folks who are not that familiar with the concept of by right, what does that mean?
Yeah, so this is a very important point that was in the state mandate. Traditionally, towns have used what's called a special permit process, which is highly discretionary. So a developer comes forward with a project idea, and then the planning board reviews it, and they can basically use their discretion to say, no, we're not going to do
That's
this.
what they were doing. The special permit process is like the project on Merriam Hill right now. That falls under the special permit project?
No, that one is actually also by right.
That's by right, okay.
So,
all right, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Before 2023, we didn't have zoning in Lexington for multifamily, period.
Okay.
There was basically nowhere you could do multifamily in Lexington. In 2023, we introduced both of the MBTA and this what's called special residential development, and they're both by right. And the reason why that was important is because towns were using that discretionary authority on the special permit to deny building multifamily housing, and that's how we got into this crisis as a region. It's one of the reasons why we got into this crisis is because towns were exercising that discretionary authority.
They didn't want it in their community.
So the state said, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to be serious about it, and we're going to do it by right. Now here's the thing about by right, for me, is that we write the rules about what can get built, we as a town, okay, and town meeting approves it. If we're seeing development that we don't like, we don't think fits, it's within our power to go back and rewrite the rules to get what we want. I don't blame the developers for producing a project which is following our rules. Right. They're doing their job. So if we don't like it, we should go back and change it. And this is what I would like to see going forward with the MBTA zoning, and we can talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah. So with that, we've got somebody had brought, it was actually originally scheduled in a special town meeting.
Still is.
It still is, technically speaking, yeah. And that initiative is coming in April, is it? When is it?
March 17th is when we're going to start debating that.
March 17th, but there's also I guess what it was is the Board of Selectmen had to react or respond by a certain period of time, but they also had to get the opinion of the planning board. Right. And that didn't line up, so they had to reschedule the special town meeting.
Right. We opened town meeting on February 3rd. It lasted 10 minutes and basically adjourned until March 17th to give the planning board time to catch up.
And the planning board has scheduled 2 public hearings.
Correct.
One, I imagine, did one of them happen already?
Yeah, February 12th, and the next one is February 26th.
February 26th. So people should know about that if they have something they want to say about this. So now let's say we get to special time meeting and this article comes up. What do you anticipate? I mean, where do you stand on it, and what do you expect to happen at town meeting?
So I support the concept of Article 2, which is, the intention is to put the brakes on. And give the town time to digest what's in the pipeline and to rewrite Article 2, rewrite the MBTA zoning, to do things at a more measured pace, I think is basically the idea. So, like I said, I support it in concept. There's a couple of things that I'm hoping will change before it comes to a vote in March 17th. One is there's still a debate about whether or not the Article 2 language will keep us in compliance with the state. And I think smart minds need to just get together and work that out so that everybody agrees we're in compliance. Because the proponents want to be in compliance.
Right.
But there are other people who think that it's not in compliance. And so we just need to make sure everybody's
It'd be a
on the
wasted
same page.
effort if I mean, if the state rules it.
Yeah, and it's going to create
yeah.
legal issues, and it doesn't make any sense. And we shouldn't be having that debate on town meeting floor. We should figure that out ahead of time.
Right.
The second thing is that one of the ways that the Article 2 seeks to put the brakes on is by limiting how many units per acre you can build. And so the limit they came up with was 15 units per acre, which is based on what the state minimum requirement is. The problem with Article 2 is it does nothing to control the size of buildings.
Right.
We still have the controls that we have now are going to be in place.
Just bigger units, higher square footage.
So that would be the natural reaction of developers is to build bigger units, which are going to be more expensive, which hurts the attainability, right? So it's having this unintended consequence. So I think there's some background discussions going on to possibly change, to introduce more controls in the size of the buildings, and then maybe you raise the units per acre a little bit to allow developers to build smaller units if that's what the market is asking for.
But to be clear, that doesn't have any real effect on the amount of, if the planning board has already voted, and I've got over 1,000 units. I mean, everybody, like I said before, I don't know the exact number, 1,100 or whatever, but still the fact is that's happening.
Yes.
So you can't go back and fix that.
No. And the Article 2 explicitly grandfathers in 9 projects that are in the pipeline.
Okay.
That's right.
So then they can then put the brakes on and then take a look at future projects.
But there's a lot more that we can do to clean up the MBTA zoning. And so what I've been saying is pretty much no matter what we eventually vote on March 17th and whether it passes or fails.
Right.
I want to be on the planning board to go back and rewrite MBTA zoning to get fewer projects and smaller projects that I think will fit in nicely in Lexington. And then,
because there are a lot of other things I want to get to, but I do want to talk about this mitigation. There was really no language to speak of in the MBTA mandate that talked about mitigation. Which means, like when this building was built, they put aside money for schools, they put aside money for this, it was all part of the negotiation. None of that is taking place because there's no mandate for it in the MBTA rules.
Right.
So they're sort of skating it under the radar screen. So now going forward, we've learned a little bit of a lesson. Not that we could do anything about it, but we want to make sure going forward, as we're doing this on a case-by-case basis, we're keeping in mind mitigation.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So when we're talking about how towns were basically making it difficult to build, one of the ways they were doing that is by doing what's called value extraction. You keep asking the developer for more and more and more until the point where they give up. They give up. So again, that's why the state was being very careful about allowing towns to do that type of value extraction.
Right.
That said, I think when we go back to rewrite the rules, which I would like to do, I think we can and we should put in some things for like transportation mitigation for sure, to make sure that some of the needs, will be met with some funding from the developers.
Because there are going to be infrastructure, costs. Whether it's additional, the effect it has on the roadway, the more cars that are going to be coming in. Because, it's. I was talking with Patrick Mayer a little while ago, and he, his numbers I think are a little higher than what is really expected. But he's a smart guy. I'll give him his due. He's a numbers guy, and so everything with him sort of comes down. It's either in the numbers or it's not. But he does make some good points sometimes in terms of, the ultimate effect, and this will have some impact on our infrastructure, public safety, other things. So the costs are going to go up, and somebody's got to bear out that cost. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's, so I've had, one of the things that I've done during my campaign and have been really one of the highlights for me is I've spoken to most of the department heads in town to understand how this housing growth is going to impact their operations. And I spoke to Chief Mike McLean about this, had a great conversation with him. And you know, he sees that he's going to have more service calls. He said they're going to probably look very much like the service calls that we have today. Right. The nature of the work isn't going to change, but there will be more demand on their services, and so they will naturally need to hire another, you know, few police officers to handle the load. Right. So I think that's all very doable, and one of the things is that, you know, only one of these 9 projects has even broken ground. We're not going to be actually seeing the impact of this for a few years, and so there's going to be time for the town to look ahead and figure out, you know, what are the
Bedford Street project, that's Ben Finnegan's.
Yes,
that
89
started.
Bedford Street.
Yeah, that started, and so far it looks like it's going well. The one thing I admire about Ben and some of the other local developers is that they're building properties that will be sold versus rental. And you know, I just have I'm a stickler for, you know, affordable home ownership and getting people in so that they can start building equity and other things.
Right. So I'll just mention one point there. You're right that of the 1,100 roughly units we're getting, 88% are rental and only 12% are condo. But if you look at the breakdown of those 9 projects, all the big projects are apartments, and all the smaller projects like Ben Finnegan's are condos, with one exception, and that's 185 Bedford Street, which is the Champa family who are developing a small rental on development, 25 units. Right. I would like to rewrite the bylaw to make the bigger buildings more difficult to build, if at all, and basically get smaller projects. Right. Which then will have the indirect consequence of being more ownership model. And I think there's definitely a role for rentals, but we're getting a lot of them, and I think it's also important to have those ownership models. Maybe, frankly, for some of the people who come and start off renting, to have a way for them to get into the ownership market and stay here in Lexington. Yeah. So I think swinging that pendulum a little bit back towards condos makes a lot of sense. I had mentioned,
I don't know if in the course of this discussion, but Muzzy Condominium is an example of what I call a visionary project, because it was allowed a lot of people that you and I both know, to buy their first homes there. You know, there's an attorney in town who's a very good friend of mine, longtime member of town meeting and active in the community. There's a retailer in Lexington Center who, you know, who bought his first home. They bought their first homes as a unit at Muzzy. Perfect. Put roots down and did it exactly what it was supposed to happen. And of course, there are caveats and guidelines as to what you can do. I mean, you know, you can't just turn around and sell it from market.
Right. So those are restricted. Yeah.
They're restricted, and it's worked. For the most part, it's worked.
Yeah.
So you know, that I'd love to see an opportunity to do something like that someday. But
I think, you know, condos today are the starter homes of 50 years ago. Right. The days of people buying their first home in Lexington. Right. That's not really reality anymore, and there's not a lot I think that we can do that. But the condominiums provide a way to get into the market.
Right, and it is what it is. I mean, you can be sad about it, but it's reality.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I look at the town I grew up in. This is not the town I grew up in, and you know what? In some ways, it's better. In some ways, you know, I miss the old charm. But you know what? We've progressed. We've moved forward, and it is what it is. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other issues. You know, you were talking about single-family homes, you know, and sort of the floor area ratios of single-family dwellings. They're getting too big, and so that's kind of a pet issue for you. Yeah. Not a pet issue, but something that's on your radar screen.
Right. So the town introduced a limitation on the size of the houses back in the 20-teens, I think, before I got on town meeting. And so we had a limit. It basically says for a given size lot, what's the biggest house you can build? And the square footage, the way that measurement is done is it includes basements, includes first, second, and up to half of the attic, and includes covered porches. All that square footage is added into the limit, the maximum that you can build. So
garages, Joe?
Actually, I need to go back and check on
Oh, that's
garages.
right. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah. I was just had that question to myself the other day. Like, I need to look that up.
Yeah, but still.
I didn't. And,
yeah. Anyway, but go ahead.
And so there was a sentiment in town that these buildings are just getting too big. People had, for different reasons. For some, it's just a visual thing. For others, it's an environmental thing, that these homes are very costly to heat and cool. So the town meeting member brought a citizen's petition in 2023 also, I believe, to town meeting, reducing the maximum size. And it got overwhelming support in town meeting. I voted for it. But developers playing by our rules, like I said. And one of the rules is that you don't have to count the basement square footage if the ceiling height is less than 6 feet 8 inches.
Right.
So they make their money by what's on the first and second floor.
Right.
That's what gets listed in the realtor listing, right? Square footage, living area. And so they just lowered the ceiling height, and then the square footage that they saved in the basement, they put above.
Right.
And so what you see from the street is what it was before, roughly speaking.
Right.
The other thing is the covered porches provide, like the fact that covered porches are counted in the GFA is a very perverse incentive, because again, the builder can make more money by putting that square footage inside the house than outside the house. So you see these large 7,000 square foot homes with like a little covering above the front door, and it's not really appropriate to me, you know, for a large house. You would be nice to have a porch out front, soften the massing a little bit, provide a little more interconnection with neighbors that are walking down the street and things like that.
Right.
So I don't think we should count covered porches in the GFA, and I don't think we should count basements in the GFA. If you want to build a basement with 8-foot ceilings, go ahead. Like, that doesn't really impact me.
Right.
So, and these are not all my ideas. There's planning board members who have talked about the covered porch issue also. So, but I think that's something that the planning board can and should go back and take a look at in fairly short order and clean that up.
Yeah. Okay, so we were talking before we started about some of the other issues that were important to you, and I'm having a hard time actually reading some of my own notes. I apologize because I was writing them so quickly. What didn't we touch base on?
Well, there's, I'll just mention accessory dwelling units real quickly.
Accessory dwelling unit, my handwriting is bad. I was going to be a doctor so I could learn how to write prescriptions. Sorry about that.
That's good.
Yeah.
Right, accessory dwelling units are independent living units that you can have either within a single family home, or you can have what's called detached or accessory apartment on the property.
And those are becoming far more necessary these days.
Yeah, well, it provides a way to do what some people call light density or general density. It's a way of creating more housing units, which we need, but they're just dispersed into neighborhoods and you don't really notice them. Provides, again, a wonderful opportunity for different use cases for people who want extra rental income. Maybe they move into the ADU and then they rent the principal dwelling.
Right.
Or maybe an adult special needs family member that you want to have nearby. Grandparents. I mean, there are all kinds of use cases. And in Lexington, we already allowed the ones within the house by right, but the detached ones were by special permit. And we're seeing about 5 of these being built a year in Lexington, I think. I tried getting the data. It's not real consistent how it's being...
Do you see that increasing?
So now the state... Because the state, you know, Governor Healy is very much about creating more housing. And so last year, the state passed a new law that says every town in Massachusetts has to allow these by right. Now again, we already allowed them by right inside houses, but not detached.
By special permit.
So we need to go back and clean up our bylaw to be consistent with the state to make them by right in both cases. And then we can go beyond the state if we want to. For the state, it's only by right up to 900 square feet. Maybe in Lexington, we want to go to, say, to 1,000 square feet because we tend to have larger properties and things like that. You might be able to support slightly larger units. And so that's something that I think the planning board will want to get to in fairly short order and get that cleaned up.
Great. And let's talk a little bit about, before we wind down, let's talk a little bit about some commercial development, because I know that was something that you were also interested in talking about today. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's no secret that large commercial buildings generate a ton of tax revenue for Lexington, which is important for our budget, for our capital needs. We have a capital stabilization fund that's going to help fund the high school. And so these
Like
projects...
440 Bedford Street is going to pay a lot into that fund, am I correct?
440 Bedford Street. Yeah, the new 6-story building.
Right. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I remember the town manager going out, Jim Malloy, was telling me that he felt part of his legacy was leaving something from 440 to help with the school.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
And I think that fund already has a few tens of millions of dollars in it, so it's definitely going to help. Unfortunately, the picture that he saw that we thought was coming hasn't really happened, and because the life sciences market really dropped out. So there were 3 large projects that were coming, that were in the pipeline, and only one of them got developed, and it's 440 Bedford. And my understanding is that building is empty right now.
It's empty. Tramwell Crowe has talked about it publicly, saying that, you know, that they're okay with it. They can obviously afford to take the hit for the time being. But what they are saying in a positive way is that when the life sciences start to re-energize, they're ready to go. Because the other 2, and this is similar in other communities around us, they've put a lot of these projects on hold. So at least 440 Bedford Street is ready to go.
It's ready to go.
Yeah.
1218 Hartwell, it's fully permitted. They haven't broken ground. And then the corner of Spring Street and Hayden, near where I live, fully permitted to do a redevelopment. Their massive redevelopment has not broken ground. So hopefully that market will come back.
Right.
But as a good example, though, 1050 Waltham Street, just next to the Waltham line, that building is assessed at $106 million, that one building. And they're paying at a commercial rate, which when you do the math of like times 1.75 gets you up close to $200 million as an assessed value in equivalent residential terms. So these projects, we need to encourage these as much as possible. So one of the things I would like to see is that the village overlay on Hartwell Avenue, there's 3 separate districts, that we actually pull those back out of the overlay to keep those parcels open for future commercial development if and when that market comes back around.
Right. Well, I know that, you know, we could start a whole conversation about Hartwell and all of that. And I'm excited about where things are going. Obviously, they're going to do some additional transportation planning down there and all of that.
Yeah, which is happening, but yeah.
Yeah, and I remember being with Mike Keneally down there at a meeting with building owners, asking for a buy-in on, you know, a mixed-use plan and all of that, because the last time we went through a whole initiative with Hartwell business owners, there wasn't a whole lot of buy-in. That's when we just sort of increased the FAR down there. But now we're talking about, you know, allowing less frontage, multi-use, you know, housing, the whole thing.
Right.
And I know a lot of it hinges on transportation planning. So, but at least we're starting to get to where we need to be. We're pretty much run out of time. I appreciate this conversation. I think we touched on a lot of issues that I think, you know, people want to learn about in terms of where you stand on these issues.
Okay.
You're obviously somebody who's very excited about it, about what you're talking about. And I have to tip my hat to you because I know that you and I have had this conversation and I've heard it from others. You've talked to a lot of people, not about what you think should happen, but you want to talk to people about their ideas.
Oh, totally, totally.
And I admire that because you're coming at it from the perspective that I really want to learn more about what people want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so many things that I don't have firsthand knowledge of that I'm learning from other people, and I've learned so much. And frankly, if I don't get elected, I don't know what I'm going to do with all this knowledge. But I'm sure it'll serve me some way.
Yeah.
But and once I get if I do get to serve on the planning board, I very much want to keep these folks in the loop, and I could even see creating the same way that the select board creates like ad hoc committees to go off and study an issue. I think the planning board can be doing that to get the experts in the room, come up with a proposal, bring it back to the planning board that they can chew on. And because the staff is, you know, they don't necessarily have the bandwidth all the time to go and be taking a deep dive on things. And so I've met residents here in town who I didn't know who are like international planning experts who are retired now, and they're happy to give back.
You'd be surprised. You know, it's like, you know, we talk about the number of Nobel laureates that live in Lexington. We've got a wealth of resources in this community that if we just tapped it a little bit more, we'd be...
So I definitely want
we could probably cure cancer.
Definitely want to be able to do that.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. Before we go, I'd like you to tell people about where they can find out more about you, let's give out your website and any other information that you think is important before we sign off.
Sure.
So we can just talk right to our folks right there.
So yeah, my website is shipleforlexington.com. And
S-H-I-P-L-E.
SHIPLEFOR Lexington.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
You know, this is a competitive election, which is great. We're getting you know, people discussing the ideas and the issues. Every vote's going to count, and I would really appreciate your vote on March 3rd. You know, I'm kind of person that I really, frankly, enjoy digging into these bylaws. I'm trained as an engineer, very detail-oriented and analytical, and I do my homework. And you know, my intention is, if I get elected, to be going to these planning board meetings, having done my homework and having an opinion and speaking up and being a strong voice in the planning board.
Well, Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim.
All right.
Enjoyed it.
Great. Thank you.